when did you first watch this film? It's been a while, huh? Since you've watched it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's part of the reason I wanted to talk with you about it because I actually saw, opening weekend in the movie theater. It
Oh
was kind
yeah, is
of
that right?
it was kind of a much awaited film, which in certain circles, which we can talk about. But I know
Yeah.
you hadn't seen it, and I think definitely for this film, like knowing as little as possible, and like the first viewing is the most enjoyable one. So that's why I was interested. I also know we were looking for some sort of
Yeah.
lighter fare in terms of the horror
Yeah, yeah,
movies
yeah.
before Halloween. So
Yeah, absolutely. We'll be talking we're talking about Cabin in the Woods. It is a 2011 science fiction comedy horror film directed by Drew Goddard and Joss Whedon. Drew Goddard in his directorial debut.
yeah, so it was written
So
written by Joss Whedon and Drew
yeah,
Goddard and directed by Drew Goddard. And
Drew Goddard, right? Yeah.
if people don't know, Joss Whedon was creator of Buffy the Vampire Slayer and Angel, and that's how he met Drew Goddard. Drew Goddard started as a writer on those series.
Right.
Yeah.
That's what I understand. Yeah.
Mhm.
So yeah, I mean, I liked it. I thought it was fun. Um, it's clever, in the way that it is like a parody, and then it's like it's critical of other films, but then it's self-critical as well. So I thought it was interesting. I had a lot of fun with the ending, which we won't spoil, I suppose, but um, yeah, I mean, I think we all grew up with people like our age bracket, like 30s to 40s, who are in their 30s to 40s now. I think we all grew up with Buffy and like Angel. Like I remember like in seventh grade how excited people were about like watching the week's episode, and I remember specifically like when that's when Buffy and Angel finally, do it. I thought that was such a big deal. I was in middle school, I think. No, not middle school.
It
Junior high
probably,
school. I was in junior high
yeah,
school,
that's
like
the
seventh
same.
grade or something like that, eighth grade, something
Yeah,
like that. I remember like that was such a big deal that everyone was talking about. It was like the water cooler type of conversation, and yeah,
yeah,
there was
for
just so much
sure.
excitement. Yeah, and that was a
It's
lot of
it
fun. Did you kind
it's
of have good memories about it?
Well, it's interesting to me that you had that experience because it was very much not mainstream, at least in my middle school. So it
Oh,
started in
really? Interesting.
1997. So I think I was
Yeah.
probably eighth grade.
Yeah, something like
Um,
that.
and I was like the only person I knew that watched it, and I was like obsessed with it. And it was, it's middle school, so literally like the days of Trapper Keepers, and I had like things like cut out of TV Guide and like, taped to my Trapper Keeper, and I was like way into it, and I didn't know anybody else who watched it, and it was very much like a dorky thing to do, but I didn't care at all about that. But to this day, it's probably Buffy the Vampire Slayer is probably still like one of my favorite drama series of all time, which is like I say that only, not even with any guilty pleasure aspect of it. I just think it was really well written, really 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 well done. And I think it mostly holds up. So yeah, that's where and obviously that was created by Joss Whedon. So um you know going over to Cabin in the Woods, you can see a lot of similarities, right, in terms of like witty fast dialogue, characters that you come to care about in a short period of time. So I kind of want to hear, since you saw it, what, like the past few days for the first time, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, yeah, I would agree. Like I think Whedon and Goddard do a good job of making you care about the characters. Uh, yeah, in their kind of like in the in that archetypal, like because the way it starts is, you get it was interesting, like the first image of what's the protagonist's name, the girl's name?
I don't
The
remember it.
I
Yeah,
don't I don't
yeah,
I don't remember.
yeah.
I don't remember their
I
name,
mean, they're
which
sort
is
of
also kind of funny.
archetypal on
Um,
purpose,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
So it's
yeah. And she's like in her underwear. I was like, well, come on, like
Mhm.
this is silly. But when you look at the end of the film and that you like understand like what what that's a play on. Like it's fun.
Well, and also like the actor does the whole scene and then at the very end calls that out, right? And says like, by the way, you're not wearing
Yeah,
any
yeah,
pants.
yeah.
So it's like it's very much a setup for the entire movie, which is like we're going to be very
Right.
meta, we're going to be very aware of everything, and we're not going to put you in situations where it's stupid, characters doing stupid things that you're annoyed at. But it's funny that that's actually not the opening scene, like very classically, which is I think part of the reason I love the film so much is that the opening scene is like the bureaucratic office
Yeah, yeah,
chatter with which
yeah.
with I think I since you had never seen it before when I pitched it, I think I said you'll know before the title comes up for the film whether or not you're going to like it. Because I just
Yeah.
thought that that was such a like a daring way to begin a film literally called Cabin in the Woods is to start with like this
Mm,
back and forth office chatter.
sure, sure.
Um,
And it actually reminded me of like Angel. You know how when Angel, that team goes into Wolfram and Hart and like they go into the
mm,
offices and um they're controlling things and they're manipulating things there and like it really reminded me of that, like this office setting. And then Amy Acker, one of the actresses, is also obviously she's in this. So I almost thought it was like a even like a it was pointing fun at
mm.
that at Angel. I don't know. Maybe that wasn't like the intention, but I definitely felt like, oh, this is definitely can be like some sort of a offshoot Angel episode or something like that. I definitely had that feeling.
It's that same tone, right? Because if I'm recalling, so I the way I think about it, which I think is just true, is like if you've ever been in hospitals long enough, you've been around people like nurses and doctors, and there's like horrific stuff happening everywhere, but that's just like a given.
Mm,
And then they're sitting
mhm,
there talking about their lunch and what they're going to order. And so it's kind of
right.
like, I think that if the world, this world actually existed, there would be office pools and there would be people, you know, betting on this and, and talking about, I think he's talking
Yeah.
about cabinet, child-proofing cabinets and stuff like that. And it's like, that's what you would be because you'd have to, because you wouldn't be talking about the potential end of the world all day, every day. And
Yeah.
obviously,
Yeah, yeah, of
both Buffy
course.
and
Yeah.
Angel are like that too, right? Like they're dealing with these catastrophic things all the time. So they have,
Yeah.
but like the mundane has to sneak in, which is kind of interesting.
I mean, the mundane is actually what brings the comedy, right?
Yeah.
That's the comic part of it. Like that I remember this particular scene in the film where like Dana was her name, Dana the virgin, the
Hmm.
archetype, right? So she's getting choked by like a I think werewolf or something, and like everyone's like I think there's an office party going on or something where no
Hmm.
one's paying attention to her getting choked by the werewolf, but like everyone's just having a good time
Is
and
it
just
the werewolf
partying.
or is it still just one of the Buckners? Like after
Oh,
she gets
maybe
out of
yeah,
the
it's like a
lake.
zombie or something.
Yeah.
I don't quite remember, but yeah, that was funny. That was fun, and there are like all sorts of moments, like fun moments like that in the film, and
Yeah.
I thought it was good. I thought it was fun.
Yeah, I mean, I think of this
I
more as a comedy than a horror. It's like any other the cliche, right? Like when you're a good parody is both an entry into the genre and a parody of it. So it's like it is kind of a horror film, but it's also primarily, a parody of horror films, but in a loving way, right? It's not somebody making a movie being like horror stupid. It's like we're going to make a really good quote unquote horror film, but the main reason is going to be to sort of parody it as well.
Yeah, I can imagine like a person watching for the first time would be very surprised by the ending. Like that's
Hmm.
the powers that be and them controlling everything and just it being like a commentary on like slasher films and yeah, that's very fun and very oh, there's a Shining reference. I mean, they're like by the end they're like there's every reference that you could
Yeah.
possibly think of by the end, but like there I specifically remember spotting like two girls holding hands in one of the boxes.
Hmm.
Yeah, I don't know if you caught that, but like yeah, there was like a
Well, and just
well
the
there are all
fact that
sorts of it references and yeah.
yeah, there's and the boxes themselves are elevators too. So like having, we just talked about The Shining that immediately made me kind of think, but like again, we don't want to get too far into this without telling people just watch the movie because if you have any interest in it, really the best experience you can have is not knowing anything about it to the point where
Yeah.
like you potentially could think you turned on the wrong movie when you start it. Um, and so it's like I don't think we're going to be able to be spoiler free because it's like almost impossible.
Yeah.
But like if you haven't seen the movie, just stop watching this and go watch the movie. I would say
Yeah,
first.
absolutely.
That way we can
Yeah.
talk a little bit more freely. But I mean, yeah, to your point too, with like, so you know, Sigourney, the Sigourney Weaver of it all. They keep referring to her, and she's literally called the director. And
Yeah.
there's this whole, there's a part, you know, where you mentioned like in the very beginning when she's in her underwear, the other woman, and then there's a part later where um the blonde one, I forget what her archetype is called, um, but they're like about to have sex essentially, and they're like they want her to like get naked, and they're like Bradley Whitford, and like they're waiting for her to like show something, and then they have this whole conversation about like, well, why does it matter if she shows it as long as they do the deed? And it's like, because they're not satisfied anymore. They being like sort of the audience and the director, like, and these ancient ones, they're not satisfied anymore just with the act. It has to be like tantalizing in a way. And I thought that was like the most direct uh piece of dialogue in the film, which is basically about
Mm,
now we have to make these films where um you can't just have what should be satisfactory, but you have to have all this tantalizing stuff within it, which to
yeah.
me was kind of a comment on the genre, right? Because it's like
Mm,
uh, uh, for me, especially in 2011 when this comes out, like there was sort of a little bit of a move towards like my least favorite horror, which is like the sort of quote unquote torture porn subgenre of
mm,
horror, which I don't think anybody likes that moniker. I don't think the people who do it do, or the people who watch them do. But
yeah.
my point is like there were a bunch of horror films where the point was to sort of disgust you and watch these sort of characters you don't care about have this pain inflicted upon them in an interesting way, and then that would be why you would watch. And I think that's like so the opposite of why I like horror, right? Like I've
Mm,
mentioned this before, I want to be rooting for the characters, I want to care about the characters, and I want ultimately I want to be hoping for the characters to survive. And so I think this is a good movie because it's like a good play on that, because you do ultimately want, in this one, you care about them enough to want them to survive, even to the point where by the end, their survival ensures like the destruction of everyone anyway, and they're going to die anyway. So it like logically makes zero
right.
sense for them to survive. But yeah, when she comes out and she's literally the director and she's there trying to make this show for the Ancient Ones, pretty much it's like it's a pretty obvious. It's not a subtle symbolism to say like
Yeah.
this is
Sure.
about filmmakers putting on, creating these horrors for people.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah, it's interesting, that torture porn, like those types of films. I recently watched a really terrible one. I do watch them sometimes just to see like what's trending and how people are like what's popular, and like they're all the same and they're all terrible. Like usually it involves like um who's called Would You Rather, I think. Have you heard about this film? Would You Rather?
I've
I think that's what it's
heard of
called.
that. Yeah, there's a couple that are
Yeah,
just
it's
based on like
I
children's
mean that's
party games. Yeah,
I mean it's basically like, and it's all the same, like Saw is the same. It's basically they put you in this just nonsensical like plot, right? Where you have to decide, do you want to kill your girlfriend or do you want to kill your mom? It's like
right.
it doesn't show you anything about anything. It doesn't show you about anything about the character. It is just basically porn. Like there's nothing to the core of what the filmmaker is trying to say or what they're
But
trying to convey.
I mean,
So
is that one done like tongue in cheek at all, or is it just because there is
no, no, it's very,
so
very like they take themselves very seriously.
so did you see
So
Ready or Not? Because just the idea of Would You Rather, which is reminds me of like a party game type thing, reminds me
it's
of Ready or
it's
Not, which is from hide and
it's
seek.
probably
And
the same film. It's probably the
well, the thing
same
is, they
exact
sound the
film.
same, but Ready or Not was actually pretty fun. Like,
Oh, was
or
it?
I'd say it's pretty. It was, it wasn't the best film you've ever seen by any stretch, but it was good. But that's because it was very like it was supposed to be fun, and it was very aware of itself, and it wasn't.
Mm,
It didn't take itself too seriously. So it's like if you're gonna do a
mm,
movie like that, you have to be aware of the tropes and the conventions of the genre, and sort of like make us know that you know them. And I feel
mm,
like if you do, I haven't seen Would You Rather, so I can't really speak to that specific film. But I do think that going back to Cabin in the Woods, like that's the reason this is so enjoyable to me, is because you're watching this and you know that the writers and the director have seen hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of horror movies. And like you don't do that unless you love them. And you don't make a movie like this unless you love them. So that counts a lot towards sort of like my buying into it as a audience
Mm,
viewer. There's everything is kind of earned. Everything that is, would be a cheap, stupid decision, they sort of like hang a lantern on that and say
mm,
it opened the inciting incident is like them reading Latin from a book that like a diary that they found in the basement.
right.
And the the fool character is just like, really? Are we gonna start reading this Latin now? Which is like exactly the way Evil Dead, the classic Cabin in the Woods movie starts. And you could imagine people when that movie came out be like, okay, like you're gonna read this Latin from this Necronomicon. Like it's just you put characters in a movie who have seen other movies, for example, in a way. So it's like that's the reason that that full character knows not to do that. It's not because he has any experience with finding a diary, a handwritten diary in some creepy cabin. It's
Mm,
because he's seen other films like that, I think it would be my interpretation, or he's just read other literature. He knows enough to know that, like, hey, if there's Latin, it's probably bad. And so for me, that's like, I appreciated that aspect of it because it's like, why do we, in every single other version of this, it's a character who's completely oblivious to the fact that maybe you shouldn't be like doing some things that seem pretty creepy. Um, but yeah, going back to like the reference to The Shining and like that was one of the things towards the end that it takes me out of the film a little bit actually,
oh yeah,
because
interesting.
I still loved it and it's still fun, but it's more like the idea of it because when you get a lot of the close-ups of those characters, a lot of them are so clearly homages to other existing characters, and so that got me thinking more like, should it have been the actual characters? Like, would it have been? Obviously, you couldn't because you'd have to go back to every single horror franchise and like and license those characters, right? But there's the one guy who has like the weird sort of saw blades at it, and it's like,
Oh
and he
yeah,
has, and
yeah.
that's like so clearly a Hellraiser type thing, right? Because they show you that when they first go down to the basement, he's got this ball thing, which is very close to the box that's in Hellraiser that summons the Cenobites, and he's holding it. So it's like there were a bunch of, and then like you said, the clown, which is just like generic scary clown, but was it supposed to be it? And there's just any number of those where you're kind of like, or at least for me, seeing these films, I was kind of like, well, wait, so is this supposed to be? It's obviously not supposed to literally be them, but it made me think like, oh, what if this like was a world where all the actual movie monsters from like the 30s onward or 20s onward even were there. Um, like obviously, again, rights wise, that would be impossible. But like the fact that I was sitting there thinking about that took me out of the creepiness of it.
Yeah, yeah, I see where you're coming from. I mean, I don't know. I never found, I don't know. I guess I never found it creepy. I just always it just felt like a love letter to
Yeah,
these horror films overall. So I never, the interesting thing is though, like I never, I guess I wished I liked the writing a little bit more. I mean, I don't remember like laughing in the first like 45 minutes. I because I
really,
know there are jokes there. Yeah, I didn't really, I don't know. And I remember like I actually tried watching this before, and not knowing anything about it and not knowing the premise. Um, I think I turned it off at least 3 times in the
really,
past. Yeah, I just couldn't get into it. I just said, oh, maybe I'll watch it later. And I just couldn't. The thing is, I didn't even know it was written by Whedon. Um, I just turned it on just like in the, how sometimes you just feel like just watching something and just not really
hmm
paying attention to it. So I turned it on and I remember just not connecting with it. And yeah, I remembered like this time watching it, oh, this is the movie I turned off. But after watching it, yeah, I mean, yeah, I don't know if I just connected with actual writing and the comedy as much as I maybe wanted to, which is surprising because I like Joss Whedon's writing.
Well, what
He
were the
definitely has,
circumstances? Like, did you just watch it alone,
yeah,
one
just
night?
watching it, just turning. I just maybe want to watch like this film. Just it had an interesting poster always. Like I remember
Mhm.
like the poster was like this twisted house. So I just turned it on and I never got past the underwear scene. But because the underwear scene also like kind of turned me off. I was like, why? Like the doors are open, dude. Like why? It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah,
But
I mean,
then
she's standing in
obviously
front of the
like after,
window in the beginning too. Like you wouldn't be,
yeah,
but
but
like,
I guess I should have been more like thinking
well,
about it a bit more and
well, I
yeah.
think this is where like viewership and like situation really comes into play a lot too, because
Mm,
like again, I'm coming at this as somebody who was very aware that this movie was supposed to
mm,
have come out, right? It was made in 2009. It got delayed for like 2 years because like MGM went bankrupt. It eventually got released in 2011. And even when it got released, it was like, well, maybe this is never going to get released. And then it got pushed to April, which is like historically like a time when they dump movies that they don't really want to release. So I had very low expectations going in, but I did see it in a movie theater. And you have to imagine the people who
mm,
went to go see it in the movie theater opening weekend were all kind of like Whedon fans. And I remember sitting in the movie theater and you get that, again, that banter, that office chatter. And then the title Cabin in the Woods comes up. And I remember like a lot of audible laughter in the theater, like me included. So
mm,
like that experience of like everyone getting in the joke, like for the title Cabin in the Woods to come up when you've only seen like a very sterile office building with very sterile chatter, like everyone was in on that joke and everyone was ready for it.
mm,
And I think we were kind of settled in and like laughing the entire movie. And even like when they release all the monsters at the end, it was like very much this kind of like triumphant, like over the top thing. And
mm,
I think I watched the movie 2 or 3 times since, including once recently, and I still enjoy it a lot. But I do think it's more like I'm partially enjoying the nostalgia of that first time. Like
mm.
some of the stuff I'm laughing at from the recognition of kind of half remembering laughing at them the first time I watched it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I definitely want to talk about that because I feel the absolute same way when I not only with this film but with Buffy and with Angel. Have you ever gone and watched like those older episodes?
Yeah, sometimes they're on TV sometimes
Yeah.
now, and if I'm not,
Yeah,
I'll
yeah.
just like, yeah.
It's on Amazon sometimes too. Like they have like the whole like whole season, which is not a good thing for
I
me because
have the
I'll
box set
literally watch the whole
actually.
thing.
Yeah, I
But
have the full series box set that I bought
nice,
yeah,
nice, nice. Yeah, you have to like you have to do it right
yeah,
as a fan that you are, as a Buffy fan that you are. But like I think some of the episodes work really well, and I think some of them really don't. But I think overall, like to give Whedon credit, like he's such a master of that formula, you
mhm,
know. He is very masterful, and very formulaic. And
mhm,
but if you do it in such a masterful way, that's why his shows are such hit shows because people like they're dying to see that next episode.
mhm,
I remember like the first at least the first like 2 3 seasons of Buffy were were very good. They were great
yeah,
tension, just great characters, great motivations. Even the plot lines were quite good.
yeah.
And he had such control and mastery of it. Um, Joss Whedon is making like Marvel films now, right? Like he's doing Marvel stuff. Is that right? I guess what's interesting about him doing the Marvel films is I always felt like that he would go in that direction. Like he would
Mm,
always go in that like big epic superhero type of direction because he's so suited for it and his work is so kind of it lends itself to that like formula so well that I always felt that he would go in that direction. And obviously he's found success with I don't know again if he's done the Avengers or
I
I'm
mean,
sure it did very well at the box office and
it makes a lot of sense, right? I mean, he created Buffy, which was a supernatural,
yeah.
basically superhero character, and also he made his name on like dialogue and small moments with characters, which if you've I mean, I haven't seen all of the Marvel movies, but like the thing that sort of set Avengers apart was like all of these scenes, the small moments between this team of superhero characters, not the sort of bombastic fighting sequences as much. Like
Mm,
that's in all of them, but like what made it special was sort of like the like dialogue scenes between these superheroes. So like I feel like that's kind of what the biggest thing that he brought to that other people wouldn't.
mm.
Um, but yeah, this you mentioned
Yeah.
the writing too. Like this film was sort of famously written in like 2 or 3 days, depending on who you listen to. But like supposedly Drew Goddard and Joss Whedon like locked themselves in a 2 story hotel room for a weekend and we're just like, we're not coming out until we
Mm,
have a first draft of this. And then they like they sold it like based on like writing the full script. Like they, they're obviously both at a level in their careers where they could just, if they wanted to, they could go around and pitch an idea and get it, get it greenlit an idea,
Sure. Yeah.
or get paid to write it for sure. But instead they were like, let's just write it. And they just wrote the whole thing before even
Mm.
having shown it or even they pitched it to anyone.
So I guess yeah, I felt the same like type of like not that I haven't watched this film, but I did feel some sort of a nostalgia for it because of Buffy and because of its relationship and kind of the close like the theming and the tone of it. It felt like Buffy and Angel, so it's something that I was familiar with. But I guess I guess aside from that, um, and the writing, which was very clever. Um, did you feel like there was anything else that you could latch onto? Because it's interesting that we covered those two films the past 2 weeks, The Exorcist and The Shining, which are very cinematic films, right? I feel like even with The Shining, which obviously you have to admit you did watch it what 10 times you said you watched it
Yeah, I think it's a
you watched
great
it quite a
film.
bit.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is like in cinema there are always new things to learn and there are always new things to look at because the story is told through image, right? And you can study it and there's so much there that you can extrapolate and like and think about and other questions that you can ask and these really kind of cool discussions that you can have with your friends or other film lovers or whatnot. But for this particular film, would you say that so I wouldn't really go back to this film, I don't think. Like I wouldn't really because
It's
other
a
than the
good
nostalgia and other than, the clever dialogue, like I don't see myself going back to this film because I don't know if I can learn anything else from it. Um, other than
Yeah,
that, but
I
I don't
mean,
know how you feel about it. Would you go back to this
I'd
film
go
and
back to it for the fun. I think
the fun of
what
it?
what resonates with me though, which I think you could make the argument in terms of what you're saying, is that like it feels very small screen, if that's like not to use it as a pejorative, but like again, this is also 2011, which at the time of this recording is well, no, it was filmed in 2009. So TV was very different in 2009, right? 2009 is 14 years ago at this point. TV is not like the cinematic, amazing thing that it can be now. So
Hmm.
you have somebody coming from TV and Joss Whedon at that point. You have Drew Goddard coming from writing TV and then his first directorial debut. So I think you're right in that it's not that it's filmed like TV, but it doesn't have like the grand vision of of like a film beyond just the fact that there are certain shots that are parodying existing films, right?
Hmm.
It doesn't seem that you don't feel like you're in the hands of like a master filmmaker in terms of like composition and things like that, like you would be, especially in The Shining. It doesn't have like or maybe it can't really have like a filmmaker's fingerprint on that, like because like those films, because it is such a parody of so many different films, right? Like it can't be Sam Raimi and John Carpenter and all these other people in one.
I
Uh,
think there's a way. I think there's a way to make that film. I think there's a way to make it cinematic and also like I think like Fellini is maybe a good example of like that like this really like critical sort yeah I, I I think there is a way to do that I think with Joss Whedon's skill set, you know with him writing such clever dialogue and
yeah.
with him being this formula guy, TV formula kind of guy, like so it made me like the bigger question for me was like what makes cinema and like what makes
Well,
TV TV.
would you say Scream, the original Scream, is cinema?
Oh, I don't remember that movie. I don't
Because
remember it
it's
very
an
well.
interesting parallel, right? Because Scream came out in the 90s. It was Wes Craven directed it, right? And Wes Craven obviously
Wes
is
Craven. Okay.
one of the filmmakers who um he's one of the filmmakers who had a lot of legitimate entries into the genre, but created
Can
an
you remind me
entry.
of his movies, Craven? Um.
Nightmare on Elm Street would probably be his
Oh,
biggest
right, right,
one.
right, right. Yeah, yeah.
But he's got tons. Um, and Scream was very interesting at the time because horror was kind of dead, and there's lots of people written and talked about this at length, so I won't. But my point is just that um, Scream was kind of sort of revitalized horror in a good and bad way, but it was
Mm.
Wes Craven doing it, and he was one of the people who actually, again, was one of the masters of the genre in the film level. And he had made major contributions to this horror cinema, whereas the people who were making this came more from TV, right? And Kevin Williamson
Mm.
actually wrote Scream, and Kevin Williamson was like one of the writers of Dawson's Creek, actually. So there's
Oh,
some
you know what? I
interesting
was going to talk about
parallels
Dawson's Creek.
between like
I
the
was going to talk about Dawson's
WB.
Creek.
Yeah, yeah. Go ahead.
You know what? Why I was going to mention Dawson's Creek is, oh man, I don't want to say it's anything too disparaging about it, but like, have you ever gone back and watched the first episode of Dawson's
I've
Creek?
actually only ever seen the first episode of Dawson's Creek.
Oh
Uh,
man, like it was hard to get through because like you're putting these teens in these like not realistic situations and like you're forcing them. It just felt so forced. And I thought the writing was, it just didn't hold up. Like, and that's, I guess that's my issue with TV. Like, it's so like trend based and like the writing is often, you have to find ways to, sustain like, these seasons, these like, back then, I think they were like longer, right? They're like 20 episode like
yeah,
seasons,
22,
like
something
seven
like that.
seasons. It's just, yeah, it was just, yeah, that was my issue with it. And it kind of did remind me of like Saw or those kinds of movies in a certain way. Not that I'm saying like Dawson Creek is torture porn, but like it's putting people in like these situations where they're like forced to make a decision or like I don't know. I just didn't feel like I didn't feel the authenticity of it. So it was a very tough watch, Dawson's Creek. I just didn't think it was very good writing. But
I
but
only
but, but
yeah. Go ahead.
yeah, but like Buffy and Angel, I think those episodes still hold up. And one Angel episode I like particularly remember is the that I really like is the one where he gets bitten by like a demon or something. And he turns into back into a human and he's like able to spend the day with Buffy, but then something goes wrong and he gets like something happens and he has to choose between like being a vampire again and being human and staying with Buffy and ultimately like the fate of the world depends on him being a vampire again, so he decides to go and change back into being a vampire. But it was a really sweet episode where like Angel and Buffy are finally able to be together at least for one day. And I remember that episode pretty like vividly and really enjoying that episode. So yeah, Joss Whedon does good work, and I'm not saying that his work can't be cinematic, but for the most part, I think maybe because of like just the requirements of TV, that's the way he, I guess, developed his skill set. It's geared towards TV and not really towards cinema, right? And you can feel that in this film. Like it's not cinema. It's not really he's not really telling you the story through image. He's more so like it's just really clever writing that's doing
Yeah,
the heavy lifting, right? So and
it's
overall it's clever because it's obvious it's parody and it's a criticism. Um so
yeah, that's
yeah.
the thing. That's why it is clever. It is very aware of itself. It's To me, like the reason I bring up Scream is because Scream is like I feel like the difference between Scream and Cabin in the Woods is sort of like like what you're getting at in the cinematic, because Scream leans more heavily into like the whole an actual entry into the genre and is very
Hmm.
cinematic, whereas again, even though they're both an entry and a parody in a way, Cabin in the Woods is much more on the parody side and much less concerned with like the cinema of creating like a great horror film. It is more conscious of like creating a horror film that is hanging its hat on all of these things. It's more concerned with the idea, like the clever idea in bringing these things forward, than it is
Hmm.
like Scream is concerned with scaring you and creating, and then it's just like the characters along the way because they have these meta elements. That's who the characters happen to be. Whereas this movie, Cabin in the Woods, is more about like the point is that we want you to take note of all of these sort of tropes within the genre.
Mm.
Um, I it's just such a funny thing to think about, like the '90s, because like Kevin Williamson and Dawson's Creek and those things back then it was still the WB. It was before this like merger, and it was Channel 11 in New York, and it was Dawson's Creek and Buffy were actually back to back. So in their minds, it was like, hey, this is the same audience, right? And I was just like, I remember I watched the first episode and I was just like, I kind of get why you think this, right? It's like highly intelligent, articulate teens in these situations, but I was just so out. Like I was so in on like on Buffy immediately and just so out on Dawson's Creek
Mm.
immediately.
What do you think that was about though? Why do you think you gravitated towards Buffy and not towards Dawson's Creek?
Well, I think the supernatural is sort of a
Mm.
trump of, you know what I mean? Like you could put adults or teens in a supernatural situation, and those two things I think are more similar than teens in like straight dramatic, quote unquote regular situations. And so for me,
Mm.
that was like the draw for me of Buffy was the supernatural. Um, and then the great characters like, were a bonus along the way. Whereas like Dawson's
Mm.
Creek to me, and again, I only ever saw the first episode, seemed about putting these characters in like intense real situations that you could maybe believe could happen in high school. And I was just like, I remember thinking, and I think again, I was probably in eighth grade. They just blew a whole season. They crammed a whole season worth of uh plot into the pilot. Like they show, one of the characters you introduce is pregnant, and you think like, okay, this is going to be out a pregnant teen, but I'm pretty sure she starts giving birth or gives birth in that pilot episode. And I was just like, okay, this is like, and that was like 1/10 of what happened in the pilot episode. And I was just like,
Yeah.
so but it's interesting to think about, right? So Cabin in the Woods, even though it was made in 2009, does feel like a little bit of a time capsule of the '90s
Mm.
because
Mm.
the films that it's mostly parodying take place in the '80s and earlier. Kind of like Scream was parodying these films that take place in the '80s and earlier, right?
Mm.
So, but Scream also was released in the '90s. So it's weird
Mm.
to have this sort of anomaly of a 2011 released film that's doing the same, like sort of stuck back in these like films that are from the '80s.
Mm.
Um,
I wonder what this film would have been if it was like made by like a filmmaker. Like if it was like this real satire trying to make like, a more maybe pointed commentary towards like these slasher films and towards torture porn.
but don't
Like
you
I
think
wonder
this
what,
is a
yeah,
pretty pointed commentary?
it is. I think it
It's
is.
just
I think it
it's
is.
not
It's just the
particularly artful.
way, yeah. Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm trying to say, I think. Which is fine. Again,
Yeah.
I thought it was fun, especially the ending. I think the ending was a lot of fun. It really like landed for me, and like it was I was laughing by the end, and I thought it was cute. I thought it was cute. I thought it was funny.
Yeah. I mean, it's literally called Cabin in the Woods, right? So it's like, again, it's like it's almost like something you'd see on a spreadsheet, right? It's like the cabin in the wood, a cabin in the woods would be almost like a subgenre in itself. You wouldn't call something Cabin in the Woods unless you were trying to like call out like this is the straightforward version of um like I said, it's not subtle. It's like the symbolism is very like right at the surface, but I think that's all
Yeah.
purposeful because it's kind of like we want to have fun with this. Like the point of Cabin in the Woods is
Mm.
to have fun. It's not to be, and it's like, yeah, it's poking fun at a lot of stuff. And so that's the sort of criticism angle of it a little bit, but it's not meant to like you said, like it's you not there's anything necessarily to learn from this film. And I agree with that, but I also
Sure.
don't think that was the point
The
was to,
intention.
I
Right.
think, I don't think they want you to get to really think beyond like, this is really fun. And I think that's really successful. Um,
I agree. Yeah, I would agree. I liked it. I liked it. And maybe, yeah, maybe I will return back to that now after having this talk. Like, yeah, just for the fun of it and just to kind of, it's fun to see like what's in Joss Whedon's head and how like he wants to kind of convey his thoughts about some of these films, and I think it's just fun to kind of think about. Because
I think
I do like his older stuff. I mean, I do like Buffy, and I think it's the writing in Buffy is actually very good. It's actually very clever. And
which
Angel too.
was
Angel, like the series itself, Angel is very clever. Like the premise of it is clever. Like him going to a new city and then and then meeting like I forget the name Doyle or something, and then like
Mhm.
them collaborating and like them having these adventures. I think it's fun and
and
it's well done.
and a lot of those things were
So
not like, a lot of the writing that was excellent. Neither it was not all Joss Whedon. We should point out too. There's
yeah.
like
It was. I'm sure
dozens
there
of
were yeah
writers who
writers.
doing. But
Yeah.
I
That's
mean,
true.
the last thing I wanted to say too is like you and I both write horror, um, and it also stands as sort of like a moment in time, right? That like this film was released in 2011, and
Mm,
it sort of everything that it is in this film is in one way or another essentially a cliche that is being parodied, right? So it's like again, it's like a landmark on a timeline of film history where it's like if you're ever writing anything
mm,
that employs one of these things and it's not a parody or meta in some way, then it's just like, hey, you got to write something else because this is like been done to death that like it's already
yeah.
been parodied multiple times. And even though that's true, this was 2011 it was released, right? So we still have 12 years of horror films that have done these things again without any
Mm,
awareness that what they're doing is sort of so done to death. Um,
mm,
so in a way, you can learn from that, right? Like, or not even so much us because we lived through it, but like filmmakers 40 years from now are going
mm,
to be able to like go to this film in 2011 and say, wow, they were making fun of this thing that you wanted to do 40 years ago. So I think
mm,
that's kind of an interesting thing that this will always live as sort of like there were these movies in the 80s mostly that did this stuff. And even that has its background further back. And then,
mm,
you know, it was so part of the culture that these other people made these other films parodying that stuff, both within the case of Scream and Cabin in the Woods. And now you're trying to make something as if it's new and exciting when it's pretty much doing what was being
mm,
made fun of. It's like an interesting um I don't know. I think it will be part of history in that way as sort of like a landmark. I
mm,
don't think the film itself is like wants to be like historically significant necessarily, but I think it's really fun. And I think it's like, especially when it came out, it was like exactly what I wanted to see.
mm.
Um, every time a character I don't even remember when the scary movies came out, which were like straight comedy parodies made by like the Wayans brothers and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and those were not horror movies at all. Those were straight comedies, but they did
Yeah.
it all sort of they came out before Cabin in the Woods for sure, but they all had this. They came out because there was this, I think, frustration with I'm so sick of watching
Mm,
characters, and even Scream mentioned this too. I'm so sick of watching damsels in distress run up the stairs when they should be running out the front door, right? And so there's like this release valve of these films that have to be made to
yeah.
say, hey, we're going to point out all of this stuff that is cliche at this point, and
Mm,
we want something new and original. And you could even make an argument that everything that has come out that's new in horror um, could be partially because that's the other thing you can do, right? You can make a parody or you of those things, or you can make something actually new and original. Um, but all of it, I would say, is
mm,
better than the dozens of horror films that come out every year that are neither of those things, are just like
mm.
additional subpar entries in the genre doing things that we've seen before, but doing them poorly.
Yeah, that's a really, really good point. I mean, it's yeah. I think this film, Cabin in the Woods, it does strike a good, interesting balance between also, the horror elements and then the comedic elements, and then it being obviously this kind of parody. Yeah, there is a nice balance there. And I think you're right. I think it did come at the right time. When all of these other let me just look up when like the when did the first Saw movie come out? Do you remember?
Ooh, if I had a guess, I would say like 2002 or three,
Hmm.
something like that.
Yeah, and it being like a response to some of these movies. Yeah, I think that's good. I think that's important
Yeah, because
that
those movies, especially like I mentioned in another one, like the sequels, I think the original Saw it saying was 2004.
yes,
Um,
2004, you're right. Yeah.
but like those movies, I think the original Saw was kind of an interesting concept, and the
Mm,
concept itself was something, but then everything subsequent became sort of what I was talking about, which is it's about how the sort of tantalizing, interesting ways that people have to die, as opposed to caring about the
mm,
characters. The
sure.
original Saw, you want these people to somehow make a choice that gets them out of the situation. Um, and then after that, it becomes what's the interesting way these people are going to get killed. It's the same thing with the Friday the 13th sequels,
Mm,
right? How is Jason, what weapon is he going to use now? When people talk about those movies, they don't even know which movies they were in. They talk about their favorite kills, right? Um, to some extent, the Nightmare on Elm Street sequels, what interesting dream is going to be had here. Um, and then all of the lesser torture porn movies that aren't even worth naming. But my point is just you don't care about these characters. You're going there to see these people die in a way that is interesting, which is like such a perverse
mm,
thing to say. Um, and so to have a movie like Cabin in the Woods come out where you do care about the characters and
yeah.
it's
Yeah.
commenting on that, I think was
Yeah, sure. I think that's important. I think that's important. I think there is like a I think Joss Whedon is also and I guess Goddard. Um, I guess I can see them wanting to respond, right? Like I can see them
yeah.
kind of because they did, create some of the most kind of iconic TV shows that really did make you care about their characters, right? Like Buffy and obviously and Buffy is interesting too because Buffy was initially a movie, right? Like did Joss Whedon do
Buffy
that movie or no?
Buffy was originally a movie. I think it was Joss Whedon's idea, but he did not have much to do with the movie and did
Got
not
it, got
like
it,
the
got it.
movie.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
I
but
didn't like
but
the movie either, but
but it is
yeah.
very much it's flipping convention on its head, right? You have this
Sure. Yeah.
damsel in distress. Instead, we're going to make her this powerful slayer, right? That's kind of the
Yeah.
idea. So they're very
Yeah, and
much interested in these like flipping genre convention from the
sure,
beginning.
sure. And like, yeah, Buffy was like, at least for me, like being in grade school, like she was one of the first, like, I mean, for me at least, she was one of the first like really powerful women that I saw on television, I think. Like I
Yeah.
didn't like I
Well,
don't
listen,
remember
I
like
mean,
before that seeing
not to get too into the weeds with Buffy, but like the pilot of Buffy starts with a blonde um girl dressed in like a sort of like a Catholic schoolgirl high school uniform.
it's Darla, right?
It's
Darla's like the
Darla.
first.
It's
Yeah.
Darla. And but you forget now because you know who Darla is. But when you're watching
Yeah.
that pilot, you're set up to think that she is going to be in trouble.
Right,
And the
right.
scene flips with like the guy that she's with is obviously in trouble because she's a vampire and she's going to kill him. And so
Mm,
literally from the very first scene of the pilot, they're telling you, hey, don't, it's not going to be what you expect. And we are aware of the genre conventions of the damsel in distress, etc. And we're going to be flipping that all the time, right? So she's actually the
mhm.
bad person. She's a vampire. And then this damsel, blonde teenage girl named Buffy, which I think is very purposeful, um, is actually the superhero. So, I mean, I think the line from there to Cabin in the Woods is not far, right? It's like, hey,
Yeah.
we have these characters, or they're all smart characters, right? They're all like intelligent people, and they go out of their way when they start making a few stupid decisions to say that like it's like the chemistry person, it's Amy Acker who's done certain things to make
Mm,
them not themselves because they're not like the jock character who thinks, etc. So it's it's much more logical. It's much more aware of what's come before it,
mm,
which I think I appreciate a lot. Um, so yeah, I think it's worth watching. I think I'll always like to watch it for the fun of it.
mm,
Because I do just have a lot of fun with it. But I do think like every time I watch it subsequently, I'm probably going to want as many people in the room as possible with me, and I'm going to want as many people
mm.
who've never seen it and know nothing about it in the room with me.
Right.
Because this, I did
Mm,
rewatch it for this talk, and I just watched it by myself on. I think it's on HBO
mm.
Max right now, and like it was fine. But like I said, it was more like me remembering the experience of watching in
Sure.
the movie theater than
Yeah.
like
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I could see that.
yeah.
Yeah, I could see that. but yeah, overall, I feel like yeah, a needed response and a fun one and a good time. And yeah, if you watch it with some friends and get a kick out of it, I think that's what the intention was. Like
Yeah,
again, I don't think it's meant to be much more than that. But yeah, but also like some really interesting stuff in there too. I'm not gonna I'm gonna give credit where it's due to Whedon and to Goddard. I think they did make something special and a really kind of fun, nice response to what was going on during that time in horror films. So yeah,
yeah,
overall, I think I enjoyed it, and I would definitely it's I would recommend it to
yeah,
others
yeah.
that enjoy horror and are fans of horror
And horror
and
comedy. Yeah,
sure, yeah,
yeah, yeah. No, I
yeah.
agree with everything you just said. So I just, uh, if you have a bunch of friends who are looking for something light to watch for Halloween, this is definitely one of like a handful of movies I'd say that are definitely worth watching, that are fun,
Mm.
um, to watch for Halloween.
Thank you guys so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed that conversation. If you found it interesting, informative, please consider hitting that like button and subscribing. It'll really help us out. And we have some very cool conversations lined up for you guys. So I hope you're looking forward to it, and I'll see you next time.